to start recording again.
Ernest Lonano's father was, they were, I don't know what to call them. They were Ernest he calls himself an interior designer. And so he helped us pick the right fabrics, the period fabrics, and because we felt he knew, he was kind of our expert, museum expert. And he worked with us and helped us, and also with some of the furnishings that came from patrons. So we also had community collectors helping, and the Friends of Art of the Art Museum. So what is it with these things? The Friends of Art, they're hosting the Lakefront Festival this weekend. They did an antique show here that raised a minimum of $10,000 a year until money got tight. So it was used, but that we decided wasn't good because it really, every time we did the show, it destroyed the villa. I mean, they were so, they felt, I think they thought they were at McCormick Place and they could just pound nails in and big holes of plaster would drop, and, they weren't kind to the house. And no matter what you say to dealers, they're there to make money, period. And we were very nervous, and it just got worse. So we decided to move it, and we moved it off campus from here, and I don't know, it went very many places. You don't need to know that. But again, we did it to save the villa, the wear and tear on the villa. So when we moved out, we agreed to keep helping in any way we could. And we have, and most of the garniture that's here belongs to the museum, and we're happy to have it here and being used. But after the fire, we had to assess things because some of these things have gotten quite valuable over the years, so we took out the ones that we felt were too valuable to be unprotected. And but I think for the most part, things look pretty good.
Looks magnificent.
Yeah. So I think we're still okay.
Can you clarify for me what you mean by American Decorative Arts?
Correct. American Decorative Arts is a term that we use for material culture, for the kinds of things that would have been found early on in our country, starting probably the earliest 1620. And when you tour through New England, they have a lot of house museums that are open. The oldest house is in Dedham, Massachusetts, Route 1, and it's really fun to go and see. And you look at furnitures. Chairs are probably the best thing to look at because they're the most ridiculous, because you can almost do anything you want with a chair. And so we looked at the decorative arts in a little different way. We were kind of coached to consider what we did at the museum, not here. Here, because you're in a house, it's different. But when you're in a museum setting, we treated most of what we showed as sculpture because they're objects and they're mostly three-dimensional. And we appointed them with painting. We didn't ignore painting, but the paintings were not the Copleys and the Peels. They were sort of more like this Guardi, which is probably school of or studio of. So we set out and we would show furniture, very few pieces. We didn't cram it. We had a piece of metal in the first section, the 17th century. We showed a two-handled cup that's referred to in the inventory as a caudle cup. Caudle was a hot medicinal drink that people used in the colonies, and we have lots of recipes. Sometimes it's called posset, and it's hammered silver, and the motifs are wonderful because they're tulips and they're little putti, and they're acanthus leaves. And we also had ceramics, which a lot of people think should be given to the Goodwill, because we're not used to looking at ceramics in the 1700s, and they're really fun. So we used a 4-handled TIG that is signed, dated, and in honor of an anniversary. We had a piece of textile, which was, we tried to pick obvious things, the flame stitch. We had a chandelier from Belgium. Why? The family came from Belgium to Massachusetts. We tried to show that they would have brought things with them as well as made things. Mostly the furniture was made here, but Paul Revere was a 3rd-generation Huguenot from France, and Paul Revere was very popular as a silversmith. He was really called a goldsmith because you passed your exam in gold, but who could use gold? I mean, let's face it, 75% of Mr. Revere's inventory were buckles for shoes and buttons. And think of all the military buttons, not coffee pots and teapots, which he wanted. So we had things of that ilk. We might have hung Paul Revere's portrait from the Boston Museum in that section to show what a colonial gentleman would look like. And remember, he didn't wear a wig. He was a kind of a Johnny Tremaine. He wore a ponytail, and he tucked his ruffles under and worked in his shirt sleeves. So it shows you tools, costume, the kind of person they were, because they came from Europe. So much of what we imitated and mimicked was from Western European foundations. Italy, France, Germany, Holland, and the British Isles. And mostly in the British Isles. America looked mostly to England as its prototype. And if you go to the south, you get more French, but we couldn't do both. So our collectors had focused on the New England area. So you start in the 17th century, and then you go to something called William and Mary. But because we're in America, it has to be referred to as style, not period, because we are taking the names of British monarchs because we don't have a name for the 17th. All these years, we have no name for the 17th century. And that's such a boring title. I said, let's cheat and call it the Pilgrim Century, because at least the children can see a pilgrim figure. And then William and Mary then we did Queen Anne, then we did Chippendale, then we ended with Federal. Finally an American name, Federal. And we did the same thing in each section. So it was a walk through American history, but you were looking only at decorative arts and a few paintings.
That's so interesting.
And it told the story for the children. And not only did it tell the story, they got so excited, they told their own story. And they could do it because of the type of materials. Very simple. A chest of drawers, and, things that they would have had in their own homes. Maybe not as decorative or as beautifully carved, but we haven't got that today either, So, but it gave them a sense of, oh, I can have a house someday. I'll live in a house. I get to pick what I want. I get to pick my own bike out, So it introduced to them another venue, but we were really after the education part, the history part, so they could learn about our country, what we did, how we did it, why we did it. And quite frankly, we weren't so pretty good in painting in the beginning. Sir Joshua Reynolds not going to close up his shop in London, for God's sake, to come over here and fight Indians. He's just not going to do that. So what we got here were people who couldn't get work, and they were fine, but we were lucky because our star was self-taught, John Singleton Copley, and his father died when he was a little boy, and his mother remarried Peter Pelham, who was an artist trained in the academy, who had come over here to get work. So he helped him. And Copley knew he was good because he had all the trade he needed, all of it. And he wrote to the second president of the Academy in London, Benjamin West from Philadelphia, and said, Mr. West, do you think you could help me with my career? I feel I'm missing something. Mr. West wrote back and said, you know, Mr. Copley, you are very good, but I think we can help you. Well, what he did is to make him more English looking, more flamboyant. And I personally feel, and this is an argument American history art historians fight about, is his American career better than his English, or vice versa? Well, some scholars think that he didn't mature until he went to England and became more of a Sir Joshua Reynolds. And of course, I like his American style because it's America. It's straightforward, honest. What you see is what you... Paul Revere's in his work clothes, for God's sake. You know, making his teapot, about to engrave it. So, you know, it's not some fake foo-foo out in the country. So I love Copley's American portraits. And when he goes to England, I think he sold his soul. Then he was just doing what everybody else was doing. Who needs that? You know? So that's what we tried to do. And that's when you hear the term, it's not a good term, but it's household goods. It's what you choose to live with. And in a way, it tells about you. See, what the scarf you're wearing tells me about you. It already tells me you have good taste. You're not wearing ties. Sometimes I turn to men's ties. I can tell, you know, certain things, but it's a good way to represent yourself. The things that you put in your house, or the things you buy, or, you know. And so these are things that young people and old people can have. I mean, it's not, it demystifies is part of what I think, so that it's not so scary, you know.
Makes it very relatable.
Yeah, right, right.
Going off of that, making history relatable, especially to children and educational groups, what was it like to grow up here? In this, you said you grew up very close to here, and what are your early memories of this space?
Well, I loved the area because where I played was Lake Park. I was in the most southern block of Shepherd, which is between Park Place and Newberry Boulevard. So my neighborhood was kind of snarky. Mrs. Fred Miller of Miller Beer was on the corner of Newberry and Shepherd, and her maid used to give me chocolate chip cookies when I went to the back door with my Irish mail. I had an Irish mail that I go around the neighborhood and collect cookies. And the man who prints all the sheet music in the world lives in the Elser house with the gnomes, and it's a porte cochere, and they blocked it now. He covered that up, but I used to run my Irish mail through. And his maid would chase me with a broom, so it was a contest. Could I beat her? And she was like out of the Wizard of Oz for me. She was the Wicked Witch of the West. Come on, you catch me. But she never did. But around that block, and the Pritzloff family was across the street, and Lake Park was over here, and that's where I played with my buggy and my bicycle, and I was very happy in the neighborhood. And we knew everybody in those days, and there was a doctor on the other corner, a lot of family people in that area. And I could walk to school because I went to a school that was housed at UWM, those little half-timber buildings. I went there to grade school. And State Teachers College there was a fence between us, and so the other kids were there, but it was a nice neighborhood. People watched out for each other. During the war, I remember my mother going out because we had blackouts, and I couldn't believe that my mother was out there in a World War I Army helmet and Red Cross kit, first aid kit on her back. And I said, Mother, why did you do that? And she said, well, they were worried that German planes would drop bombs. I said, a plane's going to get from Germany to Shepherd Avenue? I don't think so. But anyway, everybody did everything they could. I remember doing a lot for the war cause, too. The blood bank and bandages, making bandages and stuff like that. But it was a very lovely neighborhood. And all up and down there were interesting houses, like right in this block and the next block. And the water tower. As a child, I loved the water tower. And Wall Avenue, which had its charm, and Lake Drive, and the old folks' home, which I went to with my mother, and the theater and the popcorn stand. It was just a very nice, pleasant, beautiful neighborhood with Olmsted's Park. I mean, that's really where I spent more time than anything.
When was the first time that you really viewed the Villa Terrace?
Oh, I was probably, around the age of, that it meant something, probably around, it must have been around 3rd grade, I think, is when I sort of started getting. My mother was an art teacher and an artist, and my grandfather was, and her 2 brothers were musicians, so there was a lot of art blood in my veins. And so I think my mother did projects with me all my life, so I started pretty young. And she was also a good teacher of explaining what things were, like, I don't know, we'd go to antique shops. I think I went to every garage sale, white elephant sale, and antique shop known to man. And she dragged me through them, explaining everything as we went, so now I can spit it back out. I was about this big when I knew what a bobesh was, a drip pan for a candlestick. And bobesh come in everything, metal, silver, they come in glass, they come in milk glass, and everyone said, what's a bobesh? Or a marrow spoon, for God's sake. Or a pusher that I had to push my peas with. English silver implements. So I think that's what happened. My mother hammered all this stuff. Now I'm trying to get it out. But I was young when I noticed things like architecture and garden furniture. And I guess I've always had an eye for any object, automobiles, bikes, costume, it's just been there.
That's so neat. Some of the educational programs that happen here, or that you've mentioned, like, are doing things for our school children. Can you give me a few examples of what that looks like?
You mean of the tour types?
Yeah, or anything else that, if it's something aside from...
Well, most museums do programs, and we're no different. I think we put about, 60,000 school children through last year. Our year ends in August. We've been as high as 80. But, so it's a responsibility because we're supposed to be teaching off the collection. So we do, like for decorative arts, I with help, I didn't do it alone, I was able to organize 5 years of lectures on each section, the 17th century, the William and Mary, and I pulled in the finest speakers in the world for those lectures, and we packed the hall every time. And so by bringing in the big kahunas from Winter Tour to talk about furniture, for silver, there was a wonderful gentleman at Williamsburg. Philadelphia had people. I brought these people in so that our members, our community, could hear the best. And then off of that, we always built text labels, text panels, and then trained our docents on that material. And the Villa reaped that too, because we always included the Villa. We did a lot up here with antique clubs, and people that were interested in architecture and decorative arts and all of that kind of thing. So You know, we did those kinds of programs. Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Yeah. We had the antique shows, that was a program. We had gallery talks. Sometimes we would take on just a subject or one object. Other times we'd take on the whole century, you know.
Right. Are there children's art? What are you? At the villa? I'm sorry, I'm not understanding.
Do you have any role or play in the children's art that goes on in the gardens at the villa?
No, but a friend of mine started that, I believe. Leon Travanti, does that ring a bell?
Mm-hmm.
I think he's the one who started it and worked with the children, and he called me and, you know, said, do you think this is, even before he offered his services, and I said, yes, it's perfect. And he's very good with drafting and drawing and watercolors. And I said it would be a wonderful venue for that. I mean, not only the house, but the gardens, details of architecture, because they're pretty simple, you know. And the children could learn about that, yes. And Cyril Kolnick's ironwork. So, yeah, but I personally know. I just advised and encouraged and promoted it. But we have our own classes. See, we have our staff, and we're way understaffed for a museum our size and value, quite frankly. And that should come as no surprise to anybody in Milwaukee. But we couldn't do both. That's what was tearing us apart, because they never gave us any staff. You know, so we had to send ours up here.
I come from a bit of a museum background as an undergraduate, so coming here for the first time definitely struck me how the transition from a home to a museum must have been quite an undertaking. You've already mentioned some of the challenges and things like that go on, but were there any, what proved the most helpful, I guess, during that time? Like you mentioned some neighborhood donations and people really trying to play a part in converting this into a museum?
Yeah.
Public space?
Well, the collectors, the lovers of antiques and the lovers of decorative arts, and the people that were interested in architecture, interior architecture, design, and all those kinds of accoutrements that go along with it, they were the ones that supported it, that came, that did the best they could to help, that offered things. We couldn't take a lot of things, I mean, because first of all, we had no storage and no humidity and temperature control. So we had to be very careful what we took. So that was hard too, because people didn't understand why we didn't take Aunt Hattie's painted umbrella. You know, I mean, so you have to, it's the same downtown. You know, I mean, people offer you things and they get very hurt if you don't take them, but they don't understand that in today's world, museums have collections management, and they sit down and they spend hours trying to define what it is they do, how they do it, and you just, in the old days, they just backed the truck up. Aunt Hattie died, backed the truck up. They even took pots and pans from the kitchen, you know, because that's just the way it worked. So, and now museums have grown into, we're still young as a profession. We're still learning, and we're still trying to help our visitors understand what it is we do. Because they think, most people when they sit in on one of our meetings think we talk in Navajo code. They absolutely don't understand a thing we're saying. And of course they wouldn't, because there are special tools and special trainings, and, you know, being an art preparator is a special person. You're taught how to carry a painting. You don't carry it face in, and you have a big belt buckle that's carving paint off the surface of the canvas while you're carrying it. You know, and you wear gloves if it's something special, you know, so you don't get perspiration and peanut butter on the frame. And I mean, there are all sorts of things, little dumb things that you wouldn't think of unless you're trained to do it, and then you do it automatically. But people, I find adults are fascinated with what museums do. particularly the conservation part, which is changed drastically since the 19th century. In the old days, you just automatically went in and did all sorts of cosmetic things. Now they don't do anything unless they absolutely have to, because you're not there to make it look pretty.
There's a lot of factors involved.
Yeah. So, I can hang a shingle up downtown and say I repair or I restore. I love the term restore. Well, you destroy is what you do if you go to a person it's like going to a doctor. You don't want to go to a bone doctor if you have a blood problem. You just wouldn't do it, but they do for paintings. They let anybody touch their painting because they don't think to go and get help. This is something you don't know anything about. So why are you doing that? What made you think? I had a little old lady come back to the museum with a painting she borrowed. She was so proud, she cleaned it. She said, "Oh, you'll be so happy with me. I cleaned your painting." Now, what I wanted to say to her, I didn't. Turned out everything was okay because she used warm bread. She was German, and in Germany she saw people clean paintings with warm, moist bread. Lifts the dirt and grime off. Not varnish, so it was harmless, but I had to pick breadcrumbs out from the rabbit of the frame for days. There's all kashtuka in there, It was really amazing. And I never told that story, so now you have a story that's not out for human consumption. But that's what happens. Yeah, that's what happens, yeah. And what am I supposed to say to her? She was so pleased. I couldn't yell at her.
The Villa Terrace as a museum today and in the past, there have been many people working to make it what it is today. But what would you feel?
I tried to make a list, and it's not very good. Just my memory, and now I'm going back to Delphine and people to see if they can help me. The first woman that we sent up here was our, what would you call her? Our business manager. She had come up through volunteer ranks, but she's the one who, there were 8 employees when I started. So she would order the stationery, she would do the hours and the paychecks and all of that. She was like a business head so that the director could focus on art. She was a lovely woman and very smart and had a lovely manner and worked as hard as anyone. So she was ready to retire. And the director said, "Would you go up there and get it started?" Because he knew she'd put it on business like a program, with files, and she'd teach anyone how to do that. So she was the first one. Her name was Ann Donovan, and she's the one who kind of created the rental part. I have no idea where any of her stuff is. I tried to find the files here, and somebody said they were thrown away by somebody who came here recently. So I don't know. And then the next woman that came here was another woman who was retiring. Her name was Anne Harley Cole, and she was a Harley of Harley Davidson. And she had run our children's program at the museum, which was started in the 50s by the Junior League. And in those days, the Junior League would go into a facility that needed something, start it, run it for 5 years, pay for it, and then turn it over. And so when they turned it over, she was the head of it. It's called CAP. And most people I talked to, like Leon Trevani, went through the CAP program when they were little. They took classes at the Art Museum, and they said, "I was in the CAP program." And we gave scholarships. We turned no one away. And Anne Cole, and that's Kohl, but no relation to the Cole family, but she was Mr. Harley's daughter. There are very few Harleys, and there are thousands of Davidsons. So, but she did a beautiful job, and she's the one, Ann Donovan got it set up on a business, and Ann is the one who set it up as a decorative arts museum. And she's the one who furnished the British Room and did such a beautiful job, and the fabrics, the curtains, everything. And then we had a volunteer lady. We had Karen Kane. Do you know Karen Kane? Okay. Annette Robertson. Bill McGonigal came, and he had been at Detroit early, and then he had been at the Joslin. And he was a bona fide museum. He'd been in the profession for years, and this was his gig. And he's the one that came in and had to start over because all the things needed changing. It needed painting, it needed cleaning. I mean, all sorts of things needed to be done. It needed special lighting. And he's the one that kind of made it a professional house museum because he knew what he was doing. But he was not a nice person. He was mean. He was mean to people. I mean, he was kind of a curmudgeon. So he was not popular. But I loved him because he did everything right. And he left a document for everything he did and how much he paid for it. Those are the files I was looking for. So anyway, then we've been through a series of, there was a Jim Temmer, and I can't remember where he came from, but I think Old World, Wisconsin. Then we had a Dawn Wiegand, who was a costume person. A lot of people that just didn't work out, and that's where I gave up. But
What would you say this house represents to the community, and are there any conflicts of interest in that?
Well, this young man should probably answer that, but from where I sit, I think it needs marketing desperately because I think there's been a sort of, the people I worked with and knew and my childhood, and then being 50 years at the Art Museum, most of them are gone, or they're like Beth Chapman. Now, where's the next group? They're not here. I would venture to say they don't even know what the Villa Terrace, if you were to say, have you been to the Villa Terrace? And they'd say, what's that? Thinking maybe a restaurant. I think the Charles Alice is a little bit better, and I don't know why, but I find that more people know about the Charles Alice. But a lot of people were upset with some of the shows of late at the Charles Alice because they felt it was being turned into a contemporary museum, and it's not. It's a house museum. And I was thrilled when I went to the opening that John and, now I can't think of her name, that wonderful young student, they just did a show of materials from the Alice family. And I just thought, I cried. I was so pleased to see it turn back to a house museum. I'm sorry, I made a big spectacle. I had to leave the room, and everybody's like, are you okay, Barbara? And I said, no, I'm not okay. I'm very happy. These are tears of joy and happiness because the Charles Alice is back. And great family. And they gave the Charles Alice, I think, went to the library, the city library, because they didn't know where to put it. So that tells you something. It's like we don't know what to do with some of these places. Anyway.
When you say the Charles Alice is back, do you feel that the Villa Terrace as a house museum, is it up to the level that you
Well, it's never been quite as bad as what I saw at the Alice, but I think the Villa has been pretty stable. But I don't know that much about how it's used for. I know how it's used for parties and for Sunday morning and things of that ilk, and I think that's all good because it gets people in here, it gets it used, and what a beautiful setting. But I don't know much about their education program or focus. I haven't heard of anybody giving lectures about the house or the gardens, or doing lectures on 16th century villas or the history of the family. Now I know Kolnick has played a little bit of a role here because there's a gentleman who did a new book on Mr. Kolnick, mostly photography, and so that's exciting. But everybody thinks because Kolnick did the gate, and because of the gate, he did all the sconces and the chandeliers. Wrong, he didn't. But we happen to have a mini archive here of his work, and that needs to be promoted a little. Yeah.
We saw that.
Right.
It was actually a really,
Yeah.
really nice section.
It's very nice, yes. And Mr. Kolnick, good grief, he did hundreds of homes that you could drive around and see. Doors and gates and fences, and it's disgusting. He's all over the place, you know, and so yeah, there's a lot. So I don't think the villa's ever gone as far as the Charles, and I think that was maybe Martha. I think it was a show Martha did, but I'm not sure. Where, I mean, and I understand where Martha's coming from. She's curator of contemporary art. Well, then don't hire her to take care of the Alice, you know? But that's my opinion.
And during this whole process, who have been your main collaborators? Or did you work with like the
Well, see, remember I left early on. So my collaborators were the people I worked with initially. The major patron was Mr. and Mrs. Dudley Godfrey Jr. It was Dudley Godfrey who convinced our board to take it over. He was a lawyer, Godfrey and Kahn. He's been dead about 5 years. But he's the one that encouraged our museum because he was a collector of this material. And Stanley Stone, whose house is out in Fox Point on Club Circle. His house was designed by the man who designed the governor's palace at Williamsburg. He hired him to do his home, and they were period rooms. And they're in the Midwest, they're probably between John Bryan at Crabtree Farm across the Illinois border, who's restored 11 houses that you can go and see, arts and crafts, and they're filled with treasures. Plus, he has now a contemporary house and gardens. Well, I would say John and Stanley is here in Milwaukee, but people hated him. He wanted to leave his house to the village of Fox Point, and they said no. They didn't want yellow school buses. But he had stipulated in his agreement that no children under 16 would be permitted to go, which is what Mr. DuPont did. You have to be 16 years old to go into Winter Tour to this day. And I believe I'm a Hog has a house called Bayou Bend in Houston, Texas, has the same rule. We never did that. And we never had a problem that I know of. But, so I think, from my perspective, I worked with Dudley Godfrey and his wife. She was always with me whenever I needed her to help on the daily stuff and packing and unpacking and displaying and so forth. And then I worked with our staff and a couple trustees, but there were the patrons were here, and they're still here, but Dudley's not. But the Vogels, Fred Vogel, whose mother lived across the street, Mrs. Vogel's youngest son, who's now pushing 80, and his son is head of the Leighton collection, Eric Vogel. Those are the people that were the patrons, and then Stanley Stone and let's see, Krikorian, who is now gone. He was head of Rexnord, Armenian gentleman and his wife. She's still alive, and they gave a lot of decorative arts and a lot of money and a lot of help. So it's all, you always work with people who have the love, the passion, the collectors. If you're smart, you work with them. And that's mostly what I've done at the museum, is work with the major patrons, Mrs. Bradley, the Flags, the Godfreys, you know, and just helped the community use, and learn off these objects. But now I can't tell you what has happened after that, because quite frankly, after a while, I just didn't pay attention because I couldn't. But I've always tried to maintain my membership here to show support. And I have lectured here as recently as, for the first time, I was asked to come and lecture about the villa to the staff, and nobody came. That tells you something, doesn't it? Not one staff person came. The president of the Friends of Art asked me to do this, Marguerite Harvey. So I congratulate you for being interested enough to pull me in, because it's a first.
We're really excited to talk to you.
And I'm glad to get this on tape, because if I get hit by a car, I will rest in peace. Because I've been trying to get this recorded, and I was going to do it myself. But, yeah, so I congratulate you for doing it, because, you know, it may not be 100%, but it's pretty close, and somebody can come along and condemn it.
How are we doing on time?
We're about an hour, I think, maybe a little less.
So we'll just do a couple more questions, or?
Sure. Just, I mean, if you have the questions, now's the time.
I think, yeah, do you guys have anything?
I'm kind of curious about your childhood more.
About my childhood?
Yeah, since you grew up in the area.
Uh-huh.
Maybe for starters, what was your first big memory of Villa Terrace?
Oh, not as a child, I wouldn't say I had a big memory. No, that wouldn't have hit until I came back after school and started working at the museum. However, I have an older sister, 12 years older than I am, and she played with the Smith girls in the playroom, which is in the corner where Lori is. Yeah, I think that was the playroom. And when we were in charge, I had that full of play toys. That was my toy room and the men's bathroom. But we had it designed like a toy room with lots of fun things.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, antique toys and stuff, yeah.
Did your sister tell you any stories of it?
No, she just remembered having a lot of fun here. And she told me the story that her friend, now I can't remember which one it was, I want to say Dina or Deanna Smith, but I can't remember, so don't use that as factoid. But she said that the children and their mother collected all the stones from the beach. I don't know how far they went on the beach, and made that patio out in the courtyard. And I'm sure Beth Chapman told you about Hermes, the sculpture. Yeah, yeah, that was a fun thing. She's responsible for Hermes.
So later, with the donation was happening from the Smiths or Miss Curtis at the time, did you meet Miss Curtis?
Oh,
during that
sure.
time?
I did.
What can you tell us about that experience and what your impression was
Sure.
of her and of the family?
I didn't really, the director really handled her, because that's the way it goes. You know, but I was there, and was there in case she needed anything or needed my help or wanted me to do something. And she'd walk around the house with me. And a little tiny woman, you know, I don't even think she was 5 feet tall when I knew her. And my memory is that she was one of 4 or 5 sisters called the Graham Girls, and their father might have been in the music business, sold pianos. Does that ring a bell? No. You haven't looked up Mrs. Smith? Okay. One thing I think, in my opinion, again, I can't speak for the institution, I believe we made a mistake in not asking her to have an endowment go along with the gift. We just got the house. And then the rest was left up to us. And I think we made a big mistake. I think as early as, I think the first gift was maybe 64. 4, 5, 6, yeah, because we opened, yeah. And I think if I had had anything to do with it, I would have made sure that there was something there toward the maintenance of the house. Because a house like this can suck you dry. And I really, I have great empathy for the county. I feel very sorry for the county. And I don't know how they let themselves get in the position of owning 800 houses. But I would have stopped that too if I could have. because that's nonsense. That's ridiculous. So, and of course, now we have this disability problem because whoever put this hoo-hoo in that takes you down, it doesn't work. So, but you can come in from the road, but you need an airlift to get people up here. So it's, that needs attention. And in a city of Milwaukee's talent with things of that ilk, there's no excuse for that fiasco out there in my book. That's the kind of thing that drives you to drink, you know, seriously. But my memory of Mrs. Curtis, she was darling, she was charming, she had a sense of humor, she was so proud of this house, and she had stories after stories after. Christmas was a big deal here in this house. And they had lit candles, live candles on the tree in the Great Hall, and wonderful family pictures. And I asked her if we could have some. And she gave me some, and those were in Mr. McGonagall's files. I turned everything over to him, because he's the only one I trusted. But I guess they were thrown out, which I don't know why, but unless you know where they are.
It's the first I've heard of them.
The files?
Yeah.
Well, you knew there had to be files, right?
Oh yeah, they're files.
Oh, there are files.
I don't know whose or.
Oh, well, then maybe I should come look at the files and see what they are, because I would recognize most of these people. Anyway, she was living in New England, I think, at the time. I want to say Connecticut. And so she would come back and forth, but not very often. And most of the time with her, I think, was with lawyers and people drawing up tax papers and stuff. And then when she was needed, she'd come. But I was always after her to tell me stories about the house. I did not tape her because I wasn't smart enough to think about taping people then. And I regret not taping a lot of people that have since died that we could use today. I didn't start doing that until Mr. Abert came along with his gifts of the 8, the Ashcan School. And so Mr. Abert, I asked him and I asked the Flags to lecture, but I didn't get Mrs. Vogel's. I did get Mrs. Bradley. So some, it was some was easy, but I wish I had gotten Mrs. Curtis because she was fun. She was really fun. And the kind of person that would appreciate a house like this and take care of it and love it and use it. They used it. They had a lot of parties. And they had happy times here.
Do you think you could walk us through some of the things you brought?
Well, yeah, sure. I think I've pretty much covered it. I brought this, which is the inaugural catalog, and then we did this little brochure at one time of the villa with there's a little background telling that the villa is a national historic landmark. And we said here that it's a branch museum for the Art Museum, administered by the War Memorial Corporation. We're learning more and more about what that means, and that we had guided tours, and that this was a gift to the community from the family, and built in 23. I said 22, it's 1923. Okay, I have to remember that. And her husband was L.R. Smith, and he was the son of the founder of A.O. Smith. And the Sopramare, which I told you. And here's a picture of Mr. Adler, and that he was the designer. And a lot of people at that time and earlier, like the Vanderbilts and the Rockefellers and so forth, were using the architects like Mr. Adler that were considered revival architects.
Do you have any old photographs
We do in our library, probably, our library and our archives. I personally don't. I turn everything over to the library. I just kept this. But you can see, let me see if I can. You can see the kinds of things we would have had. Now you see, here's a chair that should look very foreign, you know, based on probably, let me get this so I can see too and get near the mic here or whatever. Let's see, they've got, oh boy, where's that? That's not very good, is it? Okay. Well, anyway, we'll just wing it here. But this is a kind of stately armchair that would have had a textile pillow. It would have had what they call a squab, or a pillow that would have been disgustingly fat and comfortable because people enjoyed their creature comforts, but those things get separated from the furniture. So, and you see this kind of crest rail with different kinds of designs. And here's a drop leaf table or a gate leg table, because this leg is like a gate and swings out to hold. And, well, that's not one, that's a different one. Then you see the corner chair. Here's a piece of ceramic that would have been very popular. And this happens to be what the English call salt glaze. It's a creamware, and then they throw, the last thing they do is throw salt in the kiln, and then it gives this kind of texture. This is a beautiful chest. Here's your chest, and then here's the bottom half. So it can be called a chest on chest. It can be called a high boy, or it can be called a high chest. Now, once in a while, these get separated. The family will separate them. You'll take the top half and put some stretchers and feet on it, and I'll take this and use it as a dressing table. So they get separated. So sometimes dealers marry a piece of furniture. And you used to have, and I don't know if it's still here, one of our pieces that was married. The top was made in Baltimore and the bottom in Philadelphia. And you can tell. And somebody said, well, why is it up here? And I said, because we prefer to show a piece of furniture that was not married. We want something that started life, you know, in holy matrimony. Here are the chairs that we would have used, and tried to use side chairs and armchairs. Here's a piece of porcelain that we would have used. Now, this is Chinese porcelain, and it was made for export. It was made for the European market. So we are allowed to cheat and have a lot of things from Europe and Asia because of export and import. Here's just a dressing table form, or low boy as the dealers called them. We did things like candlesticks and a game table where you can pull it up and you see it has an extra leg, 5 legs, because that one leg swings out to hold this. So a little knee hole desk, a bureau, and then chairs like this. So you look at the form, it's getting fancier and fancier, and we're in the Chippendale here and chinoiserie, the influence of the Orient. And then you see we're in the Federal period here because carving disappears and inlay becomes the change of woods is done through different various woods and their coloration rather than carving. So you go through different things, and of course a sort of a George Washington type figure. This is George. And then andirons we did. So these are the kinds of things that we showed. Coffee pots, teapots, and all of these would have come from here, from Milwaukee, out of homes. Could be 1 item, 2 items, you know, and this was what we did when we opened, to show people this is what we're looking for.
All these things somehow converge.
Right. And most families along what I call the Gold Coast have something They may not know it. They might have candlesticks or andirons. They might have a teapot. They might have a service from their grandmother. I mean, you just don't know, but, you know, with a trained eye, you can find them. So I brought these. I can't give these to you because this is mine. But we have things in our archives. And then this was another thing that we did. There's Bill McGonigal. Just another marketing tool, but things I kept because I liked, and I liked the way they were done. I love these drawings. And then people would come and say, oh, I have these things that we hung over the fireplaces. Those just walked in one day. And Mr. Flagg gave the Madonna that's in the architectural niche. He said, oh, it just cries for something. And
I think Matt just has one last question.
okay, sure.
I'm wondering if you remember any of the lingo about when they put in Lincoln Memorial, how that may affected both the public and the private community.
You mean the drive?
Yeah.
Huh?
That went in what, 32?
Yeah, to be honest, I don't know anything about Lincoln Memorial Drive because I was born in 1940, and in the 3rd grade, my family moved to Racine, and then I came back for high school. So the drive would have been put in before I was born, I would assume. I know we drove down it in our little bubble Ford. We had one of those little rounded Fords, and I always stood in the car. I stood right in the middle of the car. And I always loved going down Lake Drive because there were bumps, big bumps. And then you get to the top of the hill where the yacht club is. Oh, that was great fun. I used to sled down that. Sled? Yeah, in the snow. Yeah, my dad would bring me there. So, but I don't remember how it affected it. All I know is everybody used it. I mean, we've always used, you can go down below, but we use the top drive.
Because one of our main questions in analyzing
Mhm.
this building is how it transitioned from private to public, both inside the building, from it being a house to museum, and the landscape.
traffic?
Yeah, and just having it be a private beach to being a public.
It's hard because parking around here is a problem and always has been. And the residents didn't like it at first, particularly when we had an antique show. We had hundreds and hundreds of people come. I mean, thousands literally for the show because it was a weekend. And so we had to do a lot of valet parking. And I have no idea where they parked their cars, but they found places. But it's not an easy place to find for people if you're not familiar with the east side of Milwaukee. But then, you know, when I have out-of-town visitors, I drive them up, you know, almost all the way up to Brown Deer, just to show them what I call the Gold Coast. I mean, it's such a beautiful drive. So, but I think it was hard for people to find, number one. Number two, it was hard to park. They gave a lot of tickets in the beginning.
Still do.
Still do, right? I don't know. It's not as accessible.
Not as accessible.
And no, I mean, it has accessibility problems. Now, I don't know, that elevator went in, 2 years ago or 3 years ago? 2 years ago. Oh, is it? See, I don't know. Since I don't need it, I don't know, but it took a long time before they got an elevator. And so that was a problem. You know, just you deal with it, but that's the way it was. I mean, you know, we weren't thinking of those things in the old days. Nobody was going to get old, of course. Nobody's gonna need an elevator. So I just don't think those things were thought of, but.
Can you indulge me with one last question? And I could talk to you all afternoon, or do this for weeks on end. But going back to the caretaker couple, were they quote unquote like inherited from the Smiths? Did they work for the Smiths?
Well, there was a gentleman that was here who used to follow me around with, every time I'd walk or take a step on his floor, he would buff it.
Do you remember
But
his
he
name?
left. No, I don't remember him, but he wouldn't talk to me. He was very German, but he got very angry with me because I was always walking where he had just mopped or buffed. He had that floor. You could see your face in it. The couple that came, what's her name? Klinger, 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 Mr. and Mrs. Klinger, I think. You could find out from the War Memorial. They lived here forever. Then there was another couple that lived here with their daughter, and they were very nice. And then I can't remember.
Now, did they work for the War Memorial or for the Art
Correct, they
Museum?
worked for the for the county.
For the county.
I don't know if they worked for the War Memorial. That's an interesting question because you see there's county, there's
Right.
War Memorial, and there's Art Museum. They did not work for us.
So they
We had no staff here. The Art Museum had no staff. I mean, I was here, but this was just part of my job.
So they lived up in the wing? Up
Yes,
in
they did,
the
in the,
kitchen?
Yes, they did. Yeah, I think it was Klinger. That's a good one.
Yeah.
Schmelter was the first one. Klinger was the Schmelter. Boy, I don't know where that came from. Flying out of the blue. I think it was Schmelter. Schmelter, I think. And they were very German. Very German. And that was good too because a lot of the people that were around here in the old days were German speaking. Yeah. And I think Klinger came after. Yeah.
Do you have any stories, or could you give us some history about the garden club and how that changed?
Not
over
really,
time?
because I think Beth is the best one to do that. She's Mrs. Garden Club. The Garden Club at the Art Museum is the oldest support group we have. And I can't even tell you when that was founded, but I want to say in the 30s. And they used to do all the flowers for our openings and even for every day until we just got too big for them. But they would decorate at Christmas. And the Garden Club here, they tried their best, but look at what we have to cover. They couldn't do it. And, you know, garden clubs are fun. They love to look at flowers and talk about them, but they don't like to get on their knees and weed. I've discovered that. So, but there was a woman who just retired that I knew who worked up here all the time, Barbara Paleman. And she was very faithful, and toward the end, she was the only one that would come. She'd hold a volunteer meeting, and she'd be the only one. And she's had to retire because she's 79. So, and her back's neck. So, but I know they've always been here and very supportive, and they've brought in speakers and, you know, but I don't know. I mean, I think Beth could give you a pretty good read on that because she's kind of who we go to.
We spoke with Beth yesterday.
Yeah, she's a dear lady. Yeah, works so hard. Yeah. She used to have a tea here every Christmas for all her friends, and they were to bring their grandchildren. She'd make all the food and bring it. These little cucumber sandwiches and these little hamburgers, and oh my goodness. I don't know how she did it. Yeah.
Thank you so much for talking with us today.
Okay, well, I hope it was helpful.
Yeah, and if you have any closing thoughts?
I don't really. I just hope we can always keep the villa. That's one of my wishes, and I hope we can do that, but it's hard. It's hard, but, you know,
Something you think is manageable?
I know it's manageable. It's just a matter of people wanting to give the money to make sure it stays. And, you know, there's just so much money to go around, and we all need it. Everybody needs it. So, I mean, my hope is that we can keep quite a few of these places, like the Charles Alice and the Villa and the Pabst Mansion. There's another one. I mean, we don't have to keep them all, but we've got some goodies. And this is probably the only, I think this is the only Italian one. I'm not sure. Yeah, I think so. So there's another reason, you know, so anyway, that's my hope. Yeah.
I learned a lot today.
Well, I don't know about that.
Very insightful.
Well, you know, that's how I remember it and recall it. So, but I would love a copy of the tape.
Oh.
If you could send me one, what I'm gonna do is put it in the archive.
Okay,
They're
we'll talk
taping
to
me
Sarah.
everywhere and when I turn, because I have the stories and we have to get them down. And this is one as I say, I prepared this wonderful lecture, and Smarty had a party and no one came. So, but I'm glad, because I've now had enough time to put this in my head too, you know, which is important.
Yeah, yeah. And I think you're right that this is the only Italian. It's a very unique building because it is the only of its style.
Well, yeah, and you know, Milwaukee was so Germanic. Well, first it was English, then it was Germanic, so that you don't expect an Italian villa in the middle of Milwaukee.
Yeah.
But it's quite lovely, and I think I love David Adler's work. I mean, I don't know that people consider this one of his treasures. You know, I don't know that, but I certainly think he did a beautiful job, because it has a lot of warmth. I think, you know, it's not so cold. And so many, when you go to Italy and so many of those places, there's no warmth there. And so.
Well, if you want to give us your email address or any way to contact you,
Sure.
our phone number, we can let you know as soon as we can get you a copy of the interview.
Okay. Or you could just put it in the mail. I don't know, how do you make a copy?
We would
It'll
send
be a
you
digital
a
file.
Yeah,
A digital file that we
Yeah.
can
Okay.
send in an email probably, or
okay.
some sort of
An email, okay,
something over the internet would probably be the best way to send.
yeah.
Or we could, if you're at the art museum, we could come down and visit you and give you from like a flash drive onto a computer too.
Okay.
We could do
Yeah.
that.
I
also.
don't, you'll have to excuse me, but I'm not so pretty good with the
Yeah,
computers.
we can do it.
You know, I can
We'll
do
do
my
all the
email,
work.
but
Yeah.
our librarian, I almost would ask you to send it to her.
Yeah,
We can do that too. We can
But
have,
yeah, and I don't know that I know hers, but supposedly all staff have the same, your name.
Okay.
So I'm gonna give you mine, because I know,
Oh, it should.
okay, because I know that works, and then we'll go from there. How's that?
Sounds good.
Because if we do send you something, you can always forward it, or then you can respond with your colleague's email, and we can forward it directly to her.
You have great handwriting.
Oh, thanks. That's,
Copies for
wait-
you.
wait a minute.
originals for you.
oh, thanks.
You're welcome.
Thanks. And then, I answer my own phone,
Okay.
so
Great. Well, we'll get in touch with you.
if I'm not there, just leave a message.
Okay.
Because being retired, I don't know my hours. You know, sometimes I come in late, sometimes I leave early, so, okay. Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you so much. This was wonderful.
Yeah.
And,
As I said, I'm glad you did this, because we need it.
Well, I was gonna ask if I could, just on my own, do this again,
Sure.
I could take you out to lunch, or
Sure,
you could come
whatever.
over here,
Yeah.
or
Sure.
because you're right.